When I was in school, I was a geek. In all sorts of ways. The only thing I wanted to be was a woodworker, a cabinet maker. That's what I was really into. It's actually what I did when I first left school. And the little book that I used to carry around in my bag quite a lot, shall I admit it? The Observer's Book of Furniture. But I tell you what, I know all about Thomas Chippendale and George Hepplewhite and Thomas Sheraton. And it was a really weird thing because it speaks a little bit about how we think about things. Every now and then something reaches a different level where you describe the something by the builder, but it's not very often. So you talk about a chair, oh, that's a Chippendale. You know, walk around stately homes and I could bore you to death with what's a Chippendale, what's a Hepplewhite, what's a Sheraton, different shapes of legs and all the rest of it, different woods that they tended to use. We're going down a rabbit hole, let's stop. But what's really interesting is what we know about that piece of furniture is spoken about by the builder. It's not very often that happens. Most of the time we live with kind of things and possessions that have become the possession themselves. This little bit of Hebrews talks and speaks about and reminds us that the builder is more important, more significant than what has been built in one sense. That's really powerful, it's really important. And that was something that the Hebrews really needed to hear. These Christians, they'd come to faith, but their background, their heritage was that they were Jews, they were Hebrews. Their background was absolutely filled with stuff that had got them to the point that they were. If you asked them who they were, they would start with their identity in deep, rich, historical terms. This is who I am. I'm a Jew. I go all the way back to the Hebrew kind of foundation. They'd made that transition where they believed in Jesus. But their whole heritage was an incredibly powerful and important thing for them. It was their security. And this little bit of the text really challenges that idea, helps us to think about our lives and what we see around us. And ultimately, I believe, it challenges us and reorientates us in terms of our identity and in terms of our security. And so I want to see how that works out as we go through these 6 verses in Hebrews chapter 3. The first thing it says is fix your eyes. Look at what it says in verse 1. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters who share in a heavenly calling, fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as our apostle and high priest. That opening verse, quite honestly, we've got half an hour, whatever it might be, 20, there you go. Didn't work that singing, did it? Still going to be. We could just pause on this verse and we could just think about this, but we're not going to. But let me just pause for a minute and look at what it says. Therefore, holy brothers and sisters. The writer is identifying the hearer and saying, if you believe in Jesus, I am going to identify you as holy. You are a holy brother and sister. That's your identity. It's not something you or I always feel, is it? Do you feel holy very often? Not very often. Feel holy on a Monday morning? Or even worse, at around about 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon? Do you feel holy? Do you understand your identity according to these opening words in this new chapter? Is that first and foremost, you are a holy person. That's your identity. It's who you are. And I think it's really helpful at times for us to hear that spoken to us and reminding us of who we are, even if we don't feel it, even if our hearts are struggling with the idea of who I am as a believer in Jesus, even if all of the stuff going on in our lives is greater than what I feel, this is saying, this is who you are. You, and I say that to you with the authority of the Bible this afternoon, you and I, this afternoon, sat in this room, if we believe in Jesus as our Savior, you're holy. That's the first thing that it says. Next thing it says is fix your thoughts. Why say that? It's really simple as to why say fix your thoughts, because our thoughts tend not to be fixed in the right place. It's as simple as that, isn't it? Where does your mind go? I reckon that some of you, if I kind of really speak loud, I might have just woken somebody from what they're going to have from the takeaway after. And you might, oh right, okay, I'm back on this. Our minds and our hearts and our affections and our emotions, our understanding of who we are, they drift so quickly and so easily to all sorts of other things. That is not a criticism. That is a reality of what it means to be a human being in this world. That's who we are. Our minds drift in all sorts of directions, especially when the challenges increase. Our minds tend to divert from our identity more when the pressure increases. It's like our minds get squeezed and it oozes out in all the wrong places. We end up thinking things which are not our true identity. What's the most important thing about you if you believe in Jesus? What's the most important thing about you if you do not believe in Jesus? It's this: you are either holy or not holy. That's the most important thing. It's how God sees us. Wow, I kind of want to be holy. So let's go through the text and understand how and why that might be possible. Fix your thoughts in the place that keeps your mind in the right place, reminding yourself of who you are. Thirdly, we see that he is our apostle and our high priest. That is packed with the whole of the story of the Bible, actually. Those two identities of Jesus. Our apostle and our high priest. It starts right at the beginning of the Bible where we say, what do we see as the perfect relationship between God and human beings? We see human beings relating to God in such a way that they understand unquestionably, unreservedly, without any anguish, knowing it's the best for them, that he is their authority. That's what an apostle is. Somebody who brings the word of God in such a way that brings authority. It speaks as God. And so that's what we see right at the beginning. And then what do we see? We see a separation. And what do we need then? We need the next step, which is a priest, a high priest. We need somebody to sit between us, to bridge the gap, to be the intermediary. Because we're no longer in that place where our hearts are totally, continuously, and perfectly attuned to the authority of God in our lives. We're not that, and therefore we need a priest who sits in the gap, if you like. Intercedes, speaks in both directions. To us and for us. It's what a priest does, partly. So we're seeing here how significant the writer is opening up this little section about Jesus being greater than Moses, which we're going to come to now. He's saying, remember who you are. You're holy. Fix your thoughts on this, specifically Jesus, and remember that he is your authority and your priest. Now we see this next idea, we see this kind of inside and above idea. Look at verse 2. He was faithful to the one who appointed him, just as Moses was faithful in all God's house. He being Jesus. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. Remember the idea before where we talked about chairs and Chippendale, and actually the name of the builder or the name of the designer, or the Chippendale is bigger than the piece of wood in front of you. It's what it's saying here. The builder of the house has greater honor than the house itself. Do you realize that everything that has gone before is building something which you are relying on, which you are holding, is incredibly important? This kind of spiritual, philosophical, generational house in which you live, being a Jew, it's incredibly important to you, isn't it? But actually the builder is greater than the house that you sit in. That's the idea before it. We listen to this. This is ground-shaking, earth-shattering, mind-blowing for the first hearer. And I think it's probably because of this. And this is the whole purpose of what is being said here. I think the way it's written to me, it suggests that the Hebrews had Jesus come along and enter into their awareness. They'd accepted him, they'd believed him, but they'd had him in a way that he'd come alongside everything that they had already. I accept him, I believe him. But I need to be reminded again and again that Jesus hasn't appeared alongside the security that I have. He is greater and he is always more supreme than everything that I've relied on up to now. He is the builder, not the house. I thought Moses was the builder. Isn't Moses the builder? Don't I put all of my hope in Moses, the one who re-established this? The one who took us back out of Egypt and re-established us as a nation, identified us as the people of God, brought us all of our citizenship as a people, brought us a law, brought us an identity, brought us a relatedness that means that we are one and we are together. And Moses is so incredibly important in their thinking that they rest and rely in that. And then this writer is coming along and saying, you think that is the glory of what has been built. But let me tell you that Moses was just the builder of the house. Moses was just a servant in the house. There was a greater builder behind it all the time. It's as though the curtain has been peeled back on their understanding of all of their heritage. It's hard, isn't it, in 21st century thinking to fully enter into that. But when you've got all of your identity rooted in your Mosaic history, in who you are as a people, it's written to the Hebrews probably in Rome, certainly dispersed into the nations, probably in Rome, And yet, what do they have? Why is he writing to the Hebrews? He's not writing to Christians, as we see in other books. He's not writing to the Christians in Ephesus or in Philippi or in Corinth. He's writing to Christians who are Hebrews. Why is he doing that? It's because they are living their lives believing in Jesus, but somehow always having that tendency and that risk of drifting back into the security that they had always had, which is their identity as Hebrews wherever they happen to be at that time. That's the problem. That's the danger that they have. I've got a tendency to drift back into my cultural, religious, historical identity, and Jesus has only got to the point of coming alongside all of that. And the writer's saying, if you believe that, you have not understood Jesus, because he was the builder. He was the Chippendale. And you've actually had the apprentice. You know, okay, I'm going to geek a bit now. Chippendale, let me just tell you, didn't make hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of chairs by himself. Much like some of the great artists who didn't paint all of the great paintings. They had apprentices, they had tradesmen who used to do the work according to their design. That's Moses. He's the builder according to the design, but has no authority in the building in the sense of where it's going, what it's designed as, what its purpose is, who it is, how it is, why it is, where it is, and when it is. It's Jesus, who's always been the builder. And that's why it's so disabling. Because when I think about what my name is, it carries all sorts of Mosaic heritage. It's got that backstory that gives me security. You know, I'm in Rome, but actually my church is made up of Hebrews. It's made up a group of us who all have this backstory. One of the great things about a church like this is that we have so many different backstories. That is how the church should be. And I think this is probably written to a group of Christians who had relied more on their heritage rather than on the new nature of a new people and a new citizenship and a new heritage. You think you've been looking at Moses as the builder? You've actually been looking at the apprentice. You've been looking at the one who was told how to chisel the stones effectively, although God did that. How to carry them down. How to cut the material. How to cast the rings for the temple. That's one of the incredible things when we look at Leviticus and Deuteronomy. We see the incredible direction of how to build the tabernacle. The whole purpose of that is not so that God could prove that he was, well, although in one sense it is God proving that he's supremely and beautifully artistic, but as a second thing, as a priority, it's enforcing this is not your temple to build according to your ideas and your thoughts. It's built in minute detail because it's mine and I'm the builder. That's what's going on. Look at verse 4. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, bearing witness to what would be spoken by God in the future but Christ is faithful as the Son over God's house. See the difference? Moses is a servant in the house. The Son of God, Jesus Christ, is faithful as the Son over God's house. There's the difference. There's the authority. I think we sometimes fall into exactly the same trap. And this is why it is fundamentally important for us, this little section. In our lives, in our acceptance of Jesus in our lives, even if you are thinking, this idea of Jesus, there is so much that begins to make sense. There is so much that resonates with who I am, and I know that there is a need inside of me for something more. I'm beginning to understand that this Jesus is not just a historical man, but the claim that he is the Son of God who breaks into our time and space with an eternal hope. I'm beginning to go with that. But this makes it really clear that there's something else that is going on that you need to understand, and we need to be reminded of if we already believe in Jesus, and it's this. We come to the idea of the gospel of Jesus with all sorts of backstories of our security, what we rely on, what we believe in, what we trust in, our identity, our foundation, who we are as beings, what authority we listen to, what authority we're willing to sit under. Everything that we have behind us is our story of how we come to the gospel of Jesus. And we cannot and we must not think that Jesus simply slides in from the side and joins all of that. Because I think that's where these Hebrews were. They were of a mind that I can accept this Jesus, but I can allow him to slide in, and they were in danger of this all the time, of drifting back to the significance of everything in the past and not seeing the significance and authority of Jesus over the past and supremely over them now. Because he is their apostle and their high priest. He is their authority. And I think that's exactly where we can end up with. We're talking about Hebrews. We're talking about a Jewish history. We're talking about something that lots of us, most of us can't relate to. But what we can relate to is that we come with what we believe is our securities. Kind of writ large over the whole of the story of Hebrews is this. You're in danger of drifting back to that stuff. And you're in danger of no longer seeing the supremacy of Jesus and trusting in him first and foremost. And you're going to go back and you're going to start believing and trusting in all of that stuff that's gone before. And we can be in exactly the same danger. That's why this is a timeless message. It resonates today. Because we can be in exactly the same danger of drifting back to all of the stuff that has gone before, the stuff that makes up our society, the stuff that makes up our identity. And one of the things that we see in the idea of Moses being a servant in the house is this. There's a whole load of that house which is taking you on a journey which is great. It's not that the house was bad. The house was good. It's great, but it only gets you so far. And it only gets you so far because ultimately the house can't save you. It's only Jesus that can save you. And if you drift back to that stuff, You're going back to, as we've read in different parts, we will read in different parts, all of the issues that they thought were so important, circumcision and holy days and all of those things that were their heritage. If you go back to that, if you start relying on that again, you're in trouble. It will let you down and it will not save you. What do we rely on? I think we rely on this concept, this idea that I will somehow surely find ways that bits of me are good enough for God. That's what that stuff for the Hebrews was. If I keep this, if I do that, if I have that, if I observe this, if I don't eat this, if I do eat that, then surely God will accept me. And we're in exactly the same danger because we fill our minds with all sorts of kind of little check boxes. Almost like a tick list on your phone. I've done that. I am that. I've been that. I've managed to achieve that. I'll keep going with that. I'll create all of these ideas that one day I'm going to say, look at that, God. Look at who I am. Isn't that good enough for you? That's our kind of security ideas. And the reality is that is never good enough. And it will never save us. It's just not good enough. And that is the difference between whether we can truly say I am holy or truly say I am not holy. Because if we look at that and we say I'm relying on that, we know, hang on a sec, that's not as holy as it should be. But there is a difference when Jesus breaks in. When he becomes not just our helper, but our Savior, he gives us his holiness. So that we're able to say and we're able to join in with that first verse where it says, therefore, holy brothers and sisters, accept the holiness of Jesus that is yours by believing in him. Then we go to this next and final bit, and I'm going to be really quick because this is the ultimate security. Look at what it says at the end. You guys, you Hebrews, you've been part of this house. You've been living in this house up to now. Look at what verse 6 says. We're his house. You think all that stuff was the house? We are now the house. There's massive allusions here. What was the house in the Old Testament? It was the dwelling place of God. It was the temple. It was that idea of the central place. That's one of the ideas of the house in the whole of the Old Testament. It starts with the idea of the tabernacle, then it becomes the idea of the temple. It's the house of God. I'm part of that. And then this writer says, do you know what? We're the house. Think he's built a house back there? This is a house now. That's why singing together is something way more than just being able to sing together. It is an expression that by praising God together, we are expressing that we are the house of God. We are the house of God. And you walk out tonight, you might be one brick walking along the street, but you're still a house of God. How much do you think a builder like God would take care of his house? Again, I think verse 1 says it. He keeps care of his house in such a way that he has absolute assurance that I can call you holy. You're holy now. You don't fully know it. You don't fully see it. You don't fully feel it. There's going to come a day when you really know you are. We're going to sing our last song, Jesus, our living hope. That is absolutely what holiness is all about. It's the assurance that in eternity, I will then know who I am now but can't quite see. I'm a holy brother and you're holy brothers and sisters because of Jesus.